5:15 p.m. Patrick Clancy steps out of his house to pick up takeout. He's just grabbing dinner, a quick errand. He expects to be back in 20 minutes. In that tiny window of time, Lindsay makes a choice. Instead of packing a bag or calling someone for help, she waits for the car to pull away. And in roughly 20 minutes, she ends 3 lives and tries to end her own.
By the time Patrick returns, nearly an hour later, the house is silent. He walks through the front door at 6:09 p.m. He goes to the bedroom, but the door is locked. He finds the window open. And when he runs outside, he finds Lindsay in the backyard, broken on the ground.
She is still conscious, and Patrick asks her, "What did you do?" She replied that she had tried to kill herself by jumping out of the window. Patrick asking his wife where the kids are, she replied, "In the basement." What he finds there destroys the family forever. 3 young children, Cora, 5, Dawson, 3, baby Callan, just 8 months old, all strangled with exercise bands while their father was picking up dinner. How does a labor and delivery nurse, someone trusted to bring life into the world, go from planning a family evening to murdering her own children? Was this a cold, calculated execution, or the final catastrophic failure of a broken mental health system? Tonight, we go behind the trace of the Lindsay Clancy case.
On paper, the Clancy family looked like the kind of people you'd see on a hospital brochure. Patrick worked in IT management with a steady income, and Lindsay was a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her entire career revolved around helping other families welcome new life. Their social media showed exactly what you'd expect: kids in Halloween costumes, first days of school, and smiling selfies with captions like, "So lucky to be their mom." But what you don't see in those pictures is what started happening after their 3rd child, Callan, was born. That's when things shifted. Friends and family later said Lindsay began to seem different, more anxious, flat, and disconnected. She didn't just shrug it off, though. She told Patrick she didn't feel like herself. She told doctors. She reached out for help. Over a period of just a few months, her treatment turned into a chemical storm. 13 different psychiatric medications were prescribed to her in the months leading up to that night. We're talking about antidepressants, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and sleep meds. Names like Zoloft, Prozac, Ativan, Valium, Trazodone, and Seroquel. Some were started, others stopped, and doses were constantly changing. According to reports, Lindsay told doctors that these drugs were making her feel like a zombie. She told Patrick she had scary thoughts and even evil thoughts. At one point, she checked herself into McLean Hospital seeking help. She stayed there for about 5 days at the start of January 2023. Then she was discharged, medications were adjusted again, and she went back home to the routine. 2 weeks later, those children were dead. Everyone agrees she was struggling and that she was sick. What nobody can agree on is what that sickness actually means for what happened next. Was she a mother drowning in untreated postpartum psychosis? Or was she a woman using the language of mental illness to disguise the planning of something unforgivable?
Let's start with how the prosecution views this. When prosecutors look at January 24, 2023, they see a sequence rather than a chaotic psychotic break. To them, the timeline makes sense. That morning, Lindsay takes her daughter Cora to the pediatrician. The doctor later reports nothing out of the ordinary, no hallucinations, no wild behavior, just a mother bringing her child to the doctor. Then the afternoon moves along like any other day, until around 4 p.m. At 4:02 p.m., Lindsay searches Kids Miralax on her phone. 11 minutes later, at 4:13 p.m., she searches for 3V, a restaurant in nearby Plymouth. Immediately after looking up the restaurant, she opens Apple Maps to check the drive time. The prosecution argues this is the moment the plan solidifies. She isn't just checking a menu, she is calculating exactly how long Patrick will be gone. At 4:53 p.m., Patrick is working in his home office in the basement. Lindsay texts him upstairs. "Want to do takeout from 3V?" Prosecutors noted this was unusual. They usually ordered from places closer to home, but she specifically suggested a spot further away. Patrick texts back, "Yes." At 5:10 p.m., she calls the restaurant to place the order. The hostess later testified that Lindsay sounded completely normal. She understood her perfectly, and there was no sign of distress. At 5:15 p.m., Patrick heads out the door. The window of opportunity opens. At 5:33 p.m., while Patrick is at CVS buying medicine, he calls Lindsay. She doesn't answer. 1 minute later, at 5:34 p.m., she calls him back. The call lasts only 14 seconds. She calmly tells him which medication to buy. Patrick later said she sounded like she was in the middle of something. Prosecutors argue she was.
Meanwhile, back at the house, it's just Lindsay and the 3 kids. At some point while Patrick is gone, she grabs the exercise bands. She didn't use a gun or a knife. She chose a weapon that required sustained physical effort and repeated force. To strangle even one person with something like that requires intent. To do it 3 times, on small, struggling children, requires a level of focus that the prosecution argues is impossible during a total break from reality. After that, Lindsay moves upstairs and throws herself out the second-story window.
Meanwhile, Patrick leaves CVS at 5:37 p.m. and picks up the food at 5:54 p.m. When he finally pulls back into his driveway at 6:09 p.m., the house is quiet. The prosecution argues that every minute of that hour was accounted for, pre-planned, and executed by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing,
and that everything leading up to them was positioning her husband to be out of the way.
The defense, on the other hand, paints a very different picture. They admit that Lindsay killed the children, but where they split from the prosecution is on intent. Her attorney, Kevin Reddington, says that by the time those 20 minutes arrived, Lindsay Clancy wasn't really in control of her own mind. They argue she was in the grip of postpartum psychosis, a rare but brutal condition where new mothers experience full breaks from reality. Women with PPP have reported hearing voices telling them that their children are in danger or that killing their kids is the only way to save them. In their distorted thinking, death starts to look like protection. And then we bring the medications into it. 13 different psychiatric drugs in a matter of months. Each has its own side effects, and some are extremely powerful on their own. You mix and match these, and suddenly you're not just treating a condition, you might be creating one. The defense calls this polypharmacy. They say Lindsay was effectively intoxicated by a legal cocktail signed off by multiple professionals.
After she jumps from the window, Lindsay is rushed to the hospital with severe injuries, paralyzed from the waist down. As time goes on, she tells psychiatrists that she heard a man's voice telling her this was her last chance. The voice told her to kill the children and then herself so they could be together. If that's true, then in her mind, this wasn't an act of hatred. It was a warped, delusional attempt at mercy. The defense argues that doctors and prescribers failed her and that the system kept stacking medications without fully grasping what they were doing to her brain. They say the Lindsay who loved her children would never have done this if her mind hadn't been pulled apart. So now we have 2 competing narratives. One looks at the same 20 minutes and sees precise, ice-cold planning. The other looks at it and sees a collapse triggered by months of spiraling mental health. On one side, you've got the timeline, the restaurant search, and the choice of a moment when her husband wouldn't walk in. On the other side, you've got a documented struggle with mental health, a pharmacy's worth of prescriptions, and reports of a haunting, commanding voice. And stuck between those 2 versions is the only person who really knew what was going on in her head, Lindsay. Patrick Clancy has publicly asked people to forgive his wife. The man who came home and found his children dead is asking the world to see the woman who did it as more than a monster. He believes the real Lindsay, the one he married, was not the one in that basement. The state of Massachusetts, however, has charged her with multiple counts of murder. To them, this is exactly what it appears to be. So here's where I turn it over to you. If you were sitting in that jury box, what would you see? A prosecution argument built around timing, opportunity, and a brief window when no one else was there? Or a defense argument centered on severe mental illness, a rapidly changing medication regimen, and a mind that may no longer have been anchored in reality?
There are no easy answers here. Just a grieving father, 3 children who are gone, and a mother facing a life in prison or a secure hospital. The trial is still ahead of us, and until then, the full truth of what really happened inside Lindsay's mind during those 20 minutes remains a mystery. If you want to follow this case as it develops or see more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.